So, welcome to part 2 of Creative Collage. I'm just going to go through with you some techniques for making marks for the hand-painted paper. Now, on the first video I showed you the different types of paper. So we've got bits and pieces here, thinnish paper. This is a kind of tissue paper, slightly heavier, but it has a kind of a mottled, I don't know what it is. It's probably little threads or something in there. And I've got regular tissue paper, nice and crinkly, and then a couple of thin sheets. It's actually a little bit like copy paper, typing paper, but a tiny bit thinner. So I'll show you the different effects that we can get and some different tools to make marks. Now, I got a comment on the first video, I think it was from Mary, and she asked about the circles on white paper. Now, I actually thought she meant the other one on brown paper, but then it was afterwards I realized it was probably the special effect one with using the light modeling paste. Now I'm just looking for the particular stencil. I don't think I may have put it somewhere else. Anyway, this will do fine for these purposes at the moment. This is just a plastic stencil that I got in the where did I get it? It was the Art and Hobby Shop, I think. So what you need for this is the plastic stencil, the tissue paper, and I've put a little piece of greaseproof paper or kitchen paper underneath so I can lift it away easily. Now I just scoop out some of the light paste, and it's very strange because it's so light as a feather, and take a dollop like that, and while holding the stencil down so it doesn't slip, I spread it on just like buttering bread or making icing. Now, you do not have to do everything to the edge, because sometimes when you're working like that and you're trying to be too perfect, you might make a few mistakes, and you know, if excuse me, if you're nervous, you mess up more than if you're not nervous. So I'm just aiming to get it in the middle, and that's about right. Okay, so now take my fingers off and lift it off carefully, and there I have the marks, and it's slightly raised. So when you put this down onto a collage, the acrylic, it's like white acrylic, but it has a little bit of body in it. That stays solid, and it resists any paint that you put over it. So I'm just going to put this somewhere to dry. This was the one I had showed on the first video. The circles are different sizes. I've been actually trying to get you know, it's just trial and error, really. You just have to look up and see if you can get different shapes. But the small circles are actually quite hard to come by. You can use the this is just the waste material from making sequins, so you can use that as well. But basically that is all you have to do. It's always wise as well to keep a little piece of kitchen paper handy, and then just wipe off the excess. These are fairly resilient, but if they have a build-up of acrylic, then it starts to get in your way. So it's just a good idea, good habit to form, to just wipe it off straight after you've used it, and indeed the underneath, before you get ready for the next piece. Okay, so that's that. Now the next thing I'm going to show you is a little bit of printing, and again I'm just going to use the tissue paper for simplicity's sake. This is an archival ink. It's acid free and permanent, and it's still good to go, but if it does actually need re-wetting, you can use pure alcohol, or this is actually black, so I'm just going to put a little bit there, so I'm just going to freshen it up. And actually I haven't got my glasses on, that's really daft, isn't it? So I can't actually read this. Adirondack. Okay, so stencils and stamps, again, there's a lot on the market. You can just, I mean, even in the children's art supplies store. These are rubber. I think I've used an acrylic paint on that, but this is the alcohol ink. So I'm just going to press the stamp into that. And you can try anything. You can make your own potato prints. You can buy little pieces of rubber and carve some designs out of it. And you can also make prints from, I've cut some pieces. I think this is called funky foam, but it's just a little bit of a foam. What do you call it? It's not really paper. But if you cut this up, you can actually glue it onto some cardboard and make your own stamps, which is fun if you really get into it. Now I think that should be enough on there. It'll probably be quite subtle because this is like newsprint, unreadable newsprint, but it's just, again, it's to give a little bit of a texture or a pattern. And there's my little print. What I do quite a lot is I would take, just for experimentation's sake, just to really not have to think too much. You know, sometimes, like a lot of people, I get brain overload, so sometimes I just say, okay, I've got to go and do something simple. This is a lovely occupation. You can listen to the radio and you're doing something with your hands. It really doesn't tax your brain, and it just has the ability to put you in a better mood. So sometimes I would spread a whole sheet, and I would do lots of them, and then I'd go, that's interesting, and then I go next, and I'm not really even thinking so much about what I'm doing. Now, this is where you need the alcohol, just the plain alcohol ink, which I'm actually, not ink, what am I saying? I cannot put my hands on it at the moment, but you can get a little bottle of just pure alcohol, and then it is a good idea, again, to wipe off the stencil. So that alcohol will not run. So if you were to put a wet medium on top of that, everything stays in place, so it doesn't go into a muddy mess. So that's that. You can also use acrylic onto, let me just get my palette over here. You can use acrylic on these. And the sponges that I was talking about yesterday, this was the kitchen sponge, and it's got little holes. This was something else. Oh, I think there's a little bit of paint in it still. I'm not sure where this came from. I think it was probably face painting. So you can dab colour and this look, it'll give a sort of stubbly kind of effect. So what I'm going to do is put out some paint. Blow that off. And I'm using the golden, instead of white, a Titan Buff, just off-white. And I thought I would do sort of greeny grey colours. Some yellow. And there is some Van Dyke brown. So I've got basically two primary colours. One is slightly more green. So this will make lots of nice shades of green. And the white, which is off-white, will mix and it will give a sort of a nice tone rather than just pale the paint down, you know, to make it too sort of pastel-y. So just grab my right. And this is just a little nylon brush, relatively inexpensive. So because this isn't a primary blue, it's already got a little bit of yellow in it. It's a greeny blue. Just by paling it down, I've got that nice kind of duck egg colour. And if I add a little bit of the yellow, then I've got that super sort of bright spring green. And then I'm just going to use the very, very tip of my brush to get into that brown. As a watercolourist, I do tend to veer away from using black because it can really dull a colour. I would much prefer to use just maybe a Payne's grey or the opposite colour to grey down or take out the saturation of the paint. So we're just going to go for muted tones here. One thing about making collage paper is you can have lots and lots of fun, but you've got to remember at the end of the day you need the three basic tones, light, medium and dark, to make a picture. Otherwise it's, you know, if it's monotone and there is not enough contrast, it's kind of difficult to make a good picture from. So I have mixed, this is actually a dark, it's medium, but it's actually quite a dark colour, and I'm doing that so that you can see it, that it comes up well on the camera. So this is quite dry. My brush was, I put it into the water, but I blotted it so that it was just a damp brush. I don't want the colour slooshing all around the place because then it'll just go, it'll be far too wet and it'll just go into a puddle. So I'm just putting the paint on, a nice thin coat. And I shall just move the palette aside now. And maybe choose one of the slightly thicker papers. Now it's recommended to, you can either put some newspaper underneath or some of that funky foam, which comes in sheets, you know, sort of letter size or A4 size, because you want a little bit of give. Now I'm working on a surface which is, it's quite hard cardboard, but it is, it's soft enough. And there's my impression. Now I wasn't careful. I got some paint on the edges, but you know what, it really doesn't matter. This isn't a painting, this is just paper that I can use for a painting. The other thing you'll notice is it's kind of dry in patches. I kept it dry so that I had the distinction. It's just gone a little bit too dry there, but you know, that doesn't matter. This tissue paper it's quite absorbent, so possibly I could afford to get a little bit wetter with it. I'll probably get a different impression now if I try it on the tissue paper. And I might go a little bit darker. So I'll just mix some more of that Van Dyke brown. And just put the tip of my brush into the water. It's nice, kind of organic colour. You can always turn it over as well and do it this way. And on the tissue paper you can see more clearly if you've managed to get everywhere. I still like using the palm of my hand, even though I know you can get a little tool to rub over, but I don't do many prints, so I haven't bought one yet. Maybe if I was doing a lot more. So now you can see the difference there. This is the tissue paper. It's a slightly finer surface, and this one is like it's the surface is much more absorbent, and the paint was a little bit drier. But I quite like the indistinction there. This is much stronger. You know, I'd have to be careful about using this in a collage. It would have to be, you know, something that's going to stand out. But you'll get the feel of how to do it. The more you do, the more you practice. And if you're trying to follow rules, sometimes that can wreck your head. So it's much better to just experiment and see how things go. Now I'm going to just show you adding a little bit more water. I've still got that. I think I'm off camera there. I'm just going to bring up the colour a little bit. That's a nice, slightly brighter than olive green. And for this I'm going to wet the paint a little bit more so it's much more fluid, because I need it to cover a surface. So this is the slightly thicker paper. And if I let the brush just run out of paint, you can see the different effects. So this is a slightly dry brush. And with that dry brush, it's just picking up ever so slightly some of the texture of the paper. So I quite like that. You know, solid colour is nice, but this is much more interesting. So I'm thinking, let's see what I can do with that. And of course, when you go over the painting, one layer of paint, you don't have to leave it at that. You can do a couple of backgrounds. And sometimes I think what I used to tell my students in the past was pretend you're painting a sky or a wide area, an expanse of sea or sky or land, something like that, something with no detail in it. Right, now this is working on the tissue paper. As you can see, it's a smoother surface. Just going to add a little bit more water. But when that gets wet, it's tricky to handle. Now, I've painted quite a large area there. Often, and it kind of goes with my personality, I get fed up with one colour and I'll start painting another colour in the same area, or I'll do a tonal effect. So maybe have a little bit darker down here and see how it goes. You don't have to leave a white edge there, but I think it's easier to handle the paper because you can actually still pick it up. You can see there it's gone very, very soft, but you could transfer that to dry somewhere, or take the whole piece of greaseproof paper with you, or it can be just ledger paper or anything like that, and just leave that to dry on the paper itself, and then have a couple of handy rolls for your next piece. I'll just use, let me see now, I might just add a little bit more of that turquoise colour. That's pretty nice. So you can go pretty wet for making a background. And you can do the whole sheet. Or if you want to do some stamping, what I would recommend is wetting the sponge, putting it into your water, but then squeezing it. I think this little fella's on his last legs because it's ready to just disintegrate. So I'm going to coat the sponge. Again, the more uneven, the more interesting you're going to get, more of a mottled effect. So here is pieces of my disintegrating sponge. And then just lightly blot. So you can see I added a tiny little bit of the brown into the mixture. So I'm getting some dots like that. But this is lovely. Like in watercolor painting, you can do mosses and foliage and all sorts. So that is a really good technique to use. That's actually almost touch dry. Tissue paper is still a little bit wet, but you can get some effects by printing over. If my poor little baby sponge lasts till the end of its life. There we go. Natural sponges tend to be a little bit too soft. So yeah, so the synthetic sponge gives a more formed kind of a texture or a technique, and I used that quite a lot. Like this one that I showed earlier, this was the sponging. There was a colour down, then the sponge, and then I did some spattering. So I waited until the layers were dry. Otherwise, if you don't, it'll just all go into mud. So that's that. Let me see what else I can do. I can go back to using a stencil. And you can either use a paintbrush or a sponge. Just getting my sponge ready there. This is a better chunky piece. So just make some color. Again, not too runny, not too wet, because it'll just go like into a puddle. So this is another way you can apply the paint, or if you've got an area to work on, you can do that. So this gives a very light colouring. Just show you can see the effect there. But if you do stronger marks, you'll get more solid circles. And the nice thing about acrylics, let me see. So these circles here have broken edges and broken pieces in the middle. You can still see the paper coming through, and these are more solid. So again, it's almost it's subtler and almost more realistic going for this kind of thing rather than that, unless you're doing a highly patterned piece of work. I'll just give that a little wipe again. Let me think now, is there any more? It's still a little bit sticky, but I might try doing some blotting, so, or rather spattering. So I'm just going to take, so for contrast, I'll just use the lightest colour here, which is my Titan Buff. Now this needs to be quite runny, the opposite of the other one. And that's still a little bit thick. So I want it to basically be able to fall off the brush. So there are a couple of ways you can do this. You can just tap it like that. And the closer you are to the paper, the more directed your strokes are going to be. When I say strokes, it's the blotted areas. Some people do this, which again, you've got to think of, I'm aiming for the paper. If you do big strokes, you're going to get paint splattered everywhere, which probably doesn't matter, but you know, you want to be effective on the paper itself. So one of the things I used to, when I started off spattering, I would use a palette knife like that and just keep spattering until I'd get an area covered. And so you start to build up the depth then of the paper. Now this one is being affected quite differently. It's still quite wet here. Ooh, actually not, it's touch dry, but as the paper is quite a different paper, the spatters are absorbed straight in, so you get a super subtle effect. Let me see now. And then while you've got a paintbrush in your hand, you could just do mark making with the brush itself. And different brushes will give you different marks. You can also roll the brush like that. You can put a few different colours on. Like you could do a medium and a light colour. Or quite like this. It's kind of, you know, you get into a nice flow. A square brush like this, you can get some very sharp edges. More bold shapes like that. And as it's going to give me very, very soft edges. I haven't tried this paper before to paint on. Just try a bit more here. And you can see the acrylic paint, the underneath is actually showing through, so it's actually quite nice. You can see the different layers. But this sort of starts you off. just move these. Because these are thicker paper, they're easier to handle. My tissue paper, that's sticking underneath. So you can use bin liners as well, but you know, I find that whatever you use, they stick because the paint actually does come through underneath. I will do some more techniques with that next time when it's fully dry. So that was, to recap, that was on 1, 2, 3, 3 different weights of paper, this being handmade and much more like blotting paper. Then paperback book paper, and then tissue paper again with the stenciled acrylic texture medium. Yeah. Right, so I think that's it for now. I'm sure I've forgotten loads. Oh yes, and then I did some stamping as well. So that's acrylic paint, thin acrylic paint, but not watery. And where did I put my other little one? And then the alcohol ink. I think this is really pretty. So these light translucent layers are usually the ones that go on at the end of a collage. If you put them on at the beginning, they just blend too much into the background. And you'll see how it goes anyway. You'll be delighted with some marks, and then other marks will be disappointing. And then, you know, you just kind of find your way, and then you find something that is really, oh, you know, it's just your thing, and you keep doing loads of them, and then you get sick of that one, and then you try something else. But it's fun. It's just, it is a wonderful process for loosening up, for relaxing your mind, keeping your hands busy. It's also, you know, wonderful occupational therapy, and it's a visual language. So, you know, you're beginning to make different marks, finding out what you can make. You know, it's maybe a little bit like finger painting, but that's okay to start there. If you've had a long break from your painting practice, or you want to try something new, this is a great way in so that you can experiment, get new ideas. I've had this stamp for ages, and I'm only just really looking at it now. I'm really liking these little strokes because I've started doing some collage with fabric, and that was a leap for me to see if I could you know, start translating my lines into stitch. You know, I'm not a seamstress, I'm not a great embroiderer, so I'm looking at different textures here. So they all make good food for thought, and I shall come back then and rework on some of these and build up. You know, I'd rarely use this just on its own. I'd probably put something else in there as well. But I'll keep building up on these techniques that I've shown you, and then I'll show you how to do an actual little abstract collage. Okay, so if there's anything you want me to explain any more, just put it in the comments. I'm going to try and make a playlist of all of these so that you've got one after the other, and then I will show you some of my notebooks and show you where it's taking us. Okay, so that's all for now. See you next time. Bye.